At exactly 5 minutes past 5 in the evening, the skies over Ouagadougou trembled. A Russian Tu-160, the so-called White Swan, glided down like a silver phantom and kissed the runway. Crowds gasped, children screamed, and across the world television anchors abandoned their scripts. For the first time in living memory, a nuclear-capable bomber landed not in Moscow, not in Washington, not in Tehran, but in the heart of West Africa. And there he was, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed not in panic, not in pomp, but in calm. His crimson beret rested steady as he walked toward the aircraft as if it were no more than an honored guest. At that very moment in Washington, Donald Trump slammed his fist upon the Situation Room table. "Is this for real?" he barked. "A Russian bomber in Africa?" But in Ouagadougou, the answer was already written. A nation once spoken for was now speaking back. The question is no longer whether Africa will rise. The question is, has the era of silence already ended? Stay with us. The story unfolding is bigger than news. It's the very heartbeat of Africa declaring itself. Subscribe now and stand with a continent that refuses to kneel again. At 5 minutes past 5, the moment that would rewrite West Africa's place in global history arrived. The runway in Ouagadougou shimmered under the late sun as the Russian Tu-160, sleek, white, and deadly in reputation, descended in deliberate calm. Its wheels touched the tarmac with a hiss of heat, and the sound that followed was not of engines, it was of people. Children pressing against wire fences whispered, "That is ours now." Soldiers saluted. Ordinary citizens clutched radios to their ears and let out cries that carried beyond the airfield. This was no ordinary aircraft. Its NATO code name, Blackjack, was etched in Western intelligence reports as a relic of nuclear heritage. Yet here it was, not stationed in Europe, not paraded in Moscow, but resting on the soil of a nation long dismissed as peripheral. It was a message, and every camera lens in the world caught it. Across the Atlantic in Washington, panic spilled into the Situation Room. Screens replayed the landing frame by frame. The bomber's shadow passed across cheering citizens. The crimson-berated figure of Captain Ibrahim Traoré appeared at the center of the frame. Trump jabbed his finger at the frozen image. "That's not a reception," he growled. "That's a declaration." In Paris, emergency phones rang. Emmanuel Macron's dinner with the EU ambassador was canceled. Analysts scrambled to interpret. Was the aircraft armed? Was this Moscow's move to plant its flag in Africa's heart? But they missed the essence. This was not about bombs. It was about balance. For the first time in generations, Burkina Faso was not playing the role of a pawn. It was moving like a queen. Back in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere carried a strange electricity. Traoré did not rush. He did not wave. He walked with calm precision toward the aircraft, his hands clasped behind his back, a soldier grounded in his own soil. To the world, the scene appeared choreographed. To the people standing behind the fences, it felt like dignity embodied. International broadcasters scrambled for words. CNN stammered through unconfirmed reports. The BBC repeated nuclear capable. French television invoked crisis. But in the markets of Ouagadougou, the words were simpler. "We are not small anymore." Inside the White House, the fury built. "What is Putin offering that we are not?" Trump demanded. His advisors fumbled. Infrastructure, technology, a path out of dollar dependence. The room fell into silence when one officer finally spoke the truth. "They are moving gold, sir." That word, gold, resonated like thunder. It was not an aircraft that had unsettled the West. It was what lay beneath Burkina Faso's soil and the determination of its leader to control it. For decades, foreign corporations extracted it, foreign banks valued it, foreign governments dictated how it was sold. But now the bomber's landing signaled something else. The resource would no longer be traded with silence. Macron's fury echoed across Paris. "They are shutting us out," he barked. His defense minister warned of a joint Sahel belt forming. Mali, Niger, and now Burkina Faso, no longer whispering in Europe's corridors, but deciding in their own capitals. And on the streets of Ouagadougou, something remarkable stirred. Not fear, not confusion, but pride. A grandmother pressed their palm against the chest of her grandson and whispered, "Remember this day. Our sky is no longer borrowed." The white swan had landed, and with it, so too had a new chapter. The question was no longer whether the West approved. It was whether Africa was prepared to carry the weight of sovereignty. But what followed shook the foundations of global finance more than any runway could. The first phone call came not from a journalist nor a diplomat, but from the President of the United States himself. Inside the Situation Room, Trump leaned over the long oak table, his face flushed. "Call him, now." Encrypted channels crackled. And in Ouagadougou, standing calmly beneath the cooling turbines of the Russian Tu-160, Ibrahim Traoré answered on the very first ring. "Is this how you want to play it?" Trump's voice burst through, raw with disbelief. "You're threatening the West. You brought a nuclear bomber to Africa." Traoré's reply was not defiant nor angry. It was measured, almost gentle. "No, Mr. President. I am simply welcoming a friend." "You call that friendship?" Trump barked. "He brings warplanes. We bring contracts." Traoré's tone remained steady. "One destroys. The other builds. Which do you prefer?" There was a pause, 10 seconds of silence that felt like centuries. Then a click. The line went dead. In Paris, Macron gathered his cabinet in a midnight crisis session. His advisors showed maps. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, the Sahel belt slipping from France's grip. He clenched his fist. "We pulled our troops, and now we are locked out of the mines." Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The word gold hung heavy in the room, more threatening than any bomber. Across the Atlantic, Western news anchors struggled to keep pace. "Unprecedented," one muttered. "Provocative," said another. But on African streets, the word was different. In Accra, students tweeted the footage with 3 simple words: "This is dignity." The crisis was no longer confined to runways or war rooms. It seeped into homes, markets, and schools. In villages across Burkina Faso, radios crackled with every update. A woman in Bobo Dioulasso lifted her child and whispered, "Do you hear? Our sky has changed." Inside Washington, advisors debated retaliation. Sanctions? Aid cuts? Asset freezes? But each measure, when spoken aloud, sounded hollow. "We'll make him a martyr," one aide warned. Another added, "If we push too hard, we look like colonizers in denial." Yet Trump was unmoved. He pounded the table. "This isn't just a landing. It's an airstrike on diplomacy." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré convened his ministers under a carved wooden ceiling. No laptops, no flashing screens, just notebooks and questions. "They will cut aid," one minister said. Traoré looked up with calm. "Then we eat onions. We have copper, and now we have air cover. Let them try." His words carried not arrogance, but clarity. Our sovereignty must not become arrogance. It must become stability. And so, while Washington seethed and Paris fumed, the people of Burkina Faso watched something deeper unfold. A leader who did not bow, did not beg, and did not fear. To them, the landing was not just an act of politics. It was a rebirth. International media declared a crisis. But in classrooms, teachers paused lessons so children could hear the news. In mining towns, workers threw their helmets into the air. In marketplaces, traders shouted across stalls, "We have a spine!" The moment belonged not to governments, but to ordinary citizens who had waited generations to hear their nation speak with conviction. From Moscow came quiet reinforcement. A single message from the Ministry of Defense: "We stand ready to ensure the integrity of sovereign alliances." It was cold, calculated, and enough to unsettle Western chancelleries. But in the end, it was not the bomber that most unsettled the world. It was the stillness of a man who stood beneath it. Calm, unshaken, his presence steadier than any turbine or treaty. Yet the true battle wasn't in the skies. It was buried deep in the soil, shimmering in gold. The roar of the Tu-160's engines had long faded, but what it left behind was louder than any machine, the determination of a nation to reclaim its wealth. Within weeks, the National Assembly in Ouagadougou passed a law that would shake not only markets but mindsets, the Gold Sovereignty Act. The act was blunt, unapologetic, and revolutionary. Effective immediately, all gold extracted on Burkina soil would be processed, priced, and traded through a national exchange. Foreign corporations could no longer decide its worth. Swiss vaults would no longer be the gatekeepers. Contracts signed under colonial-era shadows were suspended pending national review, and any undeclared shipment of gold was branded not merely theft, but economic sabotage. When the law was announced, silence swept across the capital. Then the silence cracked. First with cheers in the marketplace, then parades in the streets, then vigils lit not for mourning but for marking. An old miner in Hound lifted a chunk of ore to the sky and said, "For 50 years we dug with our hands while others measured with theirs. Today we weigh on our own scales." In Paris, investment firms panicked. Stocks of French mining corporations plunged. The IMF scheduled emergency calls only to be met with silence from Ouagadougou. But inside Burkina Faso, life shifted with a strange calm. Farmers in Kaya began carving lion heads into their gold scales. School children wrote essays titled "Our Gold, Our Voice." Women at market stalls joked, "The IMF is worried about our onions now." For the first time, dignity was no longer an abstract word. It was law, stamped with the crest of the Republic. But sovereignty always brings cost. Western voices warned of sanctions, trade freezes, financial isolation. Would medicine stop arriving? Would loans dry up? In villages, people asked these questions, not with fear, but with resolve. One grandmother in Bobo Dioulasso said, "If they cut the rope, we will walk without it. Better to stumble on our own than be led by someone else." The government moved quickly. Vaults were commissioned, refineries expanded, border patrols tightened. Ministers explained the law in town halls, breaking clauses into simple language. "Every ounce that leaves our soil," one said, "will return in value that we ourselves decide." For the first time, citizens believed those words. Internationally, the tremors were real. In Brussels, a banker whispered, "It's not just paper, it's a hammer." In Washington, a senior analyst admitted, "This is worse than military alliances. It's financial mutiny." And yet in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere was not rebellion, it was rebirth. The human face of this rebirth was everywhere. University students painted murals of Traoré holding a pen forged from broken chains. A popular rapper sampled his words into an anthem that spread across Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. In marketplaces, the phrase economic sabotage became a taunt against smugglers. And perhaps the most powerful shift was psychological. For generations, people were told their resources were a burden, their economies unstable, their currencies weak. But with one law, that script flipped. Pride replaced resignation. Young men once hired to guard foreign mining camps now guarded national vaults. Old miners wept as they watched their sons wear Burkina uniforms instead of foreign logos. The Gold Sovereignty Act was not just legislation, it was memory transformed into muscle. It told the world that Burkina Faso would no longer measure itself by someone else's scales. And so, while foreign capitals plotted retaliation, the people of Burkina Faso looked not outward but inward. Their measure of success was not Paris's anger or Washington's panic. It was the simple, stubborn belief that tomorrow their gold, their food, their sky would belong to them. If you believe this is what African development truly looks like, say your word in the comments below. But sovereignty on paper is fragile. What if it could be defended in the sky? The world's reaction to Burkina Faso's defiance revealed as much about global power as it did about Africa itself. In Washington, intelligence officials admitted something they rarely voiced aloud. They're not just buying hardware, they're buying freedom. The phrase was scribbled in the margins of a CIA briefing, underlined twice. Trump, furious yet cornered, demanded options, sanctions, asset freezes, suspended visas. Yet each proposal sounded weaker than the last. His advisors reminded him, "They're trading outside our system now." For the first time in decades, the dollar was not the only voice in the room. Across the Atlantic, Paris trembled. Macron's fury was not just about politics, it was about prestige. For over a century, French influence had rested on three pillars: language, military presence, and gold. Now 2 were gone and the third was slipping fast. A French finance minister banged the table in despair. They have the gold. Not reserves, not paper. Real bars. In hushed tones, another official admitted, "We are not being pushed out. We are being erased." Moscow, by contrast, needed no grand speech. Their moves were quiet, deliberate. Debt cancellation, technology transfers, training programs. "We do not wish to own Africa," Russia's foreign minister said. "We wish to see it owned by Africans." The words landed like a dagger in Western chancelleries. Meanwhile, in Addis Ababa, whispers stirred in the corridors of the African Union. Delegates from Ghana, Tanzania, and Ethiopia asked cautious questions. Could a gold-backed exchange truly survive sanctions? Could air defense systems really secure sovereignty? One Nigerian general summed it up with blunt honesty. "Perhaps we were trained to fear our own independence." In Europe, the press used familiar terms: provocative, destabilizing, dangerous. But African journalists pushed back. A headline from Accra declared, "This is not rebellion. This is self-organization." On social media, youth in Nairobi, Lagos, and Johannesburg spread clips of Traoré's speeches, layering them with music, poetry, and street art. What Washington labeled a crisis, Africans were beginning to call a movement. And in the markets of Ouagadougou, far from embassies and boardrooms, ordinary people spoke with clarity. A vendor summed up what no think tank dared to. "They say it's risky, but so was silence. And silence gave us nothing. The bomber had landed, the gold was claimed, and the air was watched. To the West, it looked like provocation. To Africa, it looked like protection. Still, the question remained, was this just resistance or the birth of a new order? The echo of the Gold Sovereignty Act had not yet faded when another moment carved itself into history. In a hall in Niamey, representatives of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger gathered around a long wooden table. Before them lay documents bearing the seal of a new pact, the Sahel Defence Accord. But this was no ordinary signing. The pens placed upon the table were forged from melted iron shackles, once used in slave depots along the Sahel's trade routes. Metal that had bound ankles now inscribed freedom. Traoré lifted one pen, turned to a boy standing at his side, and whispered, "Do you know what this is made of?" The child nodded. "Chains." With a steady hand, Traoré replied, "Chains can break, but signatures can last." And he signed. The accord was more than a military promise. It was a statement. No more foreign bases without consent. No more air corridors open to silent surveillance. No more dependency disguised as partnership. Radar arrays would be shared, patrols coordinated, and resources defended by Africans themselves. For the first time, sovereignty was not just words spoken, it was systems built. The symbolism spread like wildfire. In Bamako, murals of lions and eagles circled maps of the Sahel. In Niamey, students marched chanting, "We sign with iron. We guard with blood. We choose our future." Across villages, radios crackled with the news. Old men who had once seen foreign flags raised above their soil now heard their grandchildren speak of defending their own skies. But with pride came questions. Could these nations withstand isolation? Would sanctions bite deeper than slogans? Would unity hold when tested? At a village gathering near Kaya, an elder answered in simple terms, "Sometimes dignity is expensive, but slavery is always more so." In Western capitals, the accord was labeled a radical pivot. In African cities, it was called something else, arrival. Not rebellion, not revolt, but a continent stepping into its own name. And in Ouagadougou, beneath the branches of a mango tree, Traoré told children what the future meant. "We stopped asking for rescue and became the storm." His words echoed beyond their circle, carried by wind, recorded on a single camera, repeated until it became chant and creed. For Africa, the road ahead was neither easy nor guaranteed. But for the first time, it was its own. And so, as dusk fell over the Sahel, one truth remained. The signatures written in iron would demand a future written in dignity. The journey began with a roar in the skies of Ouagadougou, but it was never about a bomber. It was about a continent breaking the silence that had bound it for generations. From the Gold Sovereignty Act to the Sahel Defence Accord, Burkina Faso did not just make declarations, it built structures. It wrote laws. It turned shackles into pens and fear into policy. For elders across Africa, the sight of children chanting, "We stopped asking for rescue and became the storm," carried a sacred weight. For too long, prayers were whispered in churches, mosques, and under village trees, asking for leaders who would not bow. Now those prayers are not echoes, they are blueprints. Yes, the challenges ahead are immense. Sanctions may come, pressure will mount, isolation may threaten, but something irreversible has taken root. Sovereignty is no longer theory, it is practice. It is vaults of gold weighed on African scales. It is radars that light up skies once owned by others. It is alliances signed not with foreign ink, but with iron once meant to enslave. To the West, this may look like defiance. To Africans, it looks like deliverance. The age of silence has ended. What remains is an Africa that does not ask to rise because it is already standing. If this story moves something in your chest, do not let it fade. Like, share, and subscribe. Africa spoke too softly for too long. Now it speaks with strength, and it needs your voice too. So tell me, elders and youth alike, is this the dawn of an anti-colonial Africa, finally unafraid to walk its own road? Is this the shape of true African development built not on permission but on pride? Write your answer in the comments, whether it is New Africa, Africa Rise, or simply We Are Here. Because this is not the end of a story. It is the beginning of a continent choosing its own voice. And that choice, once made, cannot be silenced again.